Okay, this is the 1920s Cultural Diversity and Conflict Part 6. There probably will be a Part 7, maybe it'll be shorter, but we're going to finish up just a point or two about the evolution controversy. Not quite through with it. Didn't quite get it brought up to date. And then we're going to look at the Sacco-Vanzetti case, one of the most controversial court cases and verdicts of the entire 20th century. In fact, it was reacted to on a global scale before it was over. Now, evolution. I left off telling you that in 1980, a federal judge struck down all four the laws in 4 different states that required that, given that there's 2 basic theories of origin of life, that in the public schools of a state they could teach both or neither. But the law's what the law said. They could not teach one to the exclusion of the other, as the old monkey law from Tennessee in the 1920s had done. Okay, but the judge ruled that, in his view, evolution is science, creation is religion, and you can't teach religion in the public school. So, bang, they're gone. To editorialize for a second, I think they both come closer to being religion than they would both come to being science. Okay? Naturalistic evolution, that is, that all the life forms that we see, all the complexity, all the variety, all the perfection, all the functionality, all of that just happened all by itself. Order emerged unbidden from chaos when they can't even explain where the chaos itself came from. That seems far-fetched. So if people believe in that, they believe in it because they believe in it, and that's why they believe in it. Okay? It's not as if it's been proven, though some might say it had. There's some that decided to skip over any awkward problems with proof and just proclaim it to be a fact. Again, that's based on the fact that if it's not this, then it's the other thing, and it can't be the other thing, meaning what, for neutral purposes, we shall call intelligent design. So I'm going to say, editorially, that theories of origin lie beyond the realm of empirical science. How would you test a hypothesis? You can't go back and run parallel scenarios. If you believe it, it's for reasons other than science, because you choose to believe it. And people do that all the time. They choose to believe something, and then after the fact, they look for reasons why. So that kind of puts evolution and intelligent design kind of on the same on the same footing. Whichever one you believe in, it's because you believe it, and it's America, so you get to believe it, and we take it from there. So anyway, there's other snarky things I could say, but I'll leave it at that, except that the intelligent design position appears to be gaining ground, mainly because of something they call fine-tuning. Okay, for life to have emerged on a planet in the late 1950s, Isaac Asimov said that there are only 2 characteristics a planet had to have to support life. Well, now that's way over 100 and growing. Okay, it has to be in a planetary system where there are other much larger planets to attract asteroids and stuff with their greater gravitational pull, keep the planet from being pulverized. It's got to have water. It's got to be precisely at a certain distance from the sun, because a few degrees hotter, and the water's all just steam, evaporates. A few degrees cooler, and it's all frozen. It has to just fall right in there. So from there being just quadrillions of planets that could support life, so now a few people are daring to suggest we shouldn't even be here. But there you go. You can believe any theory of origin that you like, but I would advise against citing science as the backing for it. The heat this generates, I'm not editorializing so much now, the heat and passion that this debate causes indicates that it's not just a scientific question. There really aren't very many conflicts between science and religion. that I can think of. They are the bases of competing and probably incompatible worldviews, and people cling to them passionately, both of them. And you can do that. That's okay. But I advise against citing science as your go-to position to support it. Okay. The last two things are two topics that are parallel because both of them test the role that people outside the mainstream in this country can play. The case of two accused murderers who happen to be Italian immigrants and anarchists named Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, their trial, conviction, and execution, in a way, stood as a test of whether people outside the mainstream could hope to get a fair trial in the United States. That looked like the answer to that was no, as far as they're concerned. And then at the way opposite end of the spectrum, the presidential candidacy of a I think first generation American named Al Smith. He went against the grain. He was a very flamboyant, colorful politician in a decade that wanted its politicians to be, dull, gray, stay the heck out of the headlines and run the government as if it's a business. He was governor of New York. He was the Democrat presidential nominee in 1928. So he's going to test whether someone outside the mainstream has got a shot of being elected president of the United States in the 1920s, or in a way, in any other decade either. All right. It's April 1920, and there's a town connected with Boston called Braintree, Massachusetts. There's a shoe factory in Braintree. It's payday, and you got railroad tracks running between buildings out there, and two men, a paymaster and an armed guard, are carrying a strong box containing $16,000 in cash. They're walking down the railroad track, heading for the shoe factory. The cash in the box is to be the pay for the workers at the shoe factory. There were just a number of men sort of lounging against the wall of one of the buildings by the tracks. Two of them detached themselves from the group, stepped down off the platform into the roadbed, drew pistols, and shot the guard and the paymaster dead. Grabbed the strong box, jumped into the back seat of a waiting running car, and the car sped away. The cash has not been found from that day to this. Okay? 100 years. Well, a few days later, two men, Sacco and Vanzetti, were arrested and charged with the crime. The evidence was slender. The investigators found at the crime scene spent shell casings, 32 caliber shell casings. It was a mixed variety of brands of ammunition. When the men were arrested, Sacco had in his possession a 32 caliber pistol and unspent ammo of the same mixed brands. That's all there was. Vanzetti, he's just with Sacco when they got arrested. That's all they had against him. He didn't have a gun or anything. Well, this doesn't get anything but local attention at first. They went on trial, and what started raising alarms was the prosecution apparently had proven beyond a doubt that Sacco and Vanzetti were in fact radical aliens, and they really were, and they'd be the first to say, yep, that's what we are. They had proven that more than they'd proven their guilt, and there was some other screwy stuff. At one point, I believe a defense attorney was up there, and a good defense attorney would like lull you to sleep with his patter of talk. And he's picked up the alleged murder weapon, and he's fiddling with it, and took it apart and put it back together, replacing the barrel. Somebody caught it. Of course, the ballistics testing was not far along at the time, but that would change that, wouldn't it? But he did get caught. They did introduce ballistics testing. That's when you fire a test bullet into something that'll, stop the bullet, and then compare it under a microscope, the scratches, the striations on the bullet, with the striations on a bullet removed from the murder victim. Ballistics testing was in its infancy, and the results were inconclusive. Also, while we're at it, the judge, and I don't know that judges normally went out and mixed with the crowd during recesses. Somebody overheard the judge, who was out mingling with the crowd during a recess, refer to the defendants using an ethnic slur, or maybe more than one, that would be attached to Italians. The two men were found guilty by the jury, and the judge, a man named Webster Thayer, sentenced them both to die in the electric chair. Okay, so protests begin to arise. There was actually a defense committee that was set up to try to plead for their innocence, and what they wanted is not just turn them loose, but a new trial, or hear an appeal by higher court, or give them a new trial. And if I'm correctly informed, and this sounds crazy, so it may not be, but I think I remember reading that in Massachusetts at that time, the trial judge had final say over whether an appeal would be heard. And of course, he didn't. Now, the authorities in Massachusetts were thoroughly upset with this judge for bungling this. This should have been handled quietly. And yet he's out here doing stuff that causes this wave of protest. What the higher-ups in Massachusetts were not prepared to do was grant a new trial or an appeal, because that would call into question public faith that the criminal justice system made 100 on every test. It was always right. You can't have people doubting that. And in their minds, the lives of two, the worthless lives of two immigrant illegal, not necessarily illegal, but radical aliens, was a small price to pay for avoiding calling that into question. Okay? Years passed. By the mid to late 1920s, this has gone global. There are petitions from foreign heads of state, foreign governments, cities around the world, legislatures of conservative states calling on Massachusetts to at least hear an appeal, at least give them a new trial. But in August of 1927, the two men took turns in the electric chair and they were electrocuted. Well, they didn't die at that point. It became a litmus test for where you were on the political spectrum. If you think they're innocent, you're a, quote, liberal, unquote. If you think they're guilty, you're what would then have been a conservative. So there it was. And much later, about 40 years later, in the early 1960s, a reporter managed to track down the pistol, the murder weapon, and after the trial, some officer of the court took it home. They were able to find it and do ballistics testing as of, say, 1961 technology, far more advanced than 1920. And it looks like Sacco's gun did kill the guard. And Sacco, according to what I've read, never really denied it. If he gets to make a statement, it's a plea for, anarchism. Vanzetti, on the other hand, is these plaintiff, please, I didn't do this. Somebody listen to me. So it looks from that standpoint like Sacco's probably guilty and Vanzetti's probably innocent. So split it 50-50 and you displease everybody, but at least only by 50%. So a very celebrated court case. Can someone outside the mainstream get a fair trial in America of the 1920s? Let's just say it's a long shot. It's a long shot, especially if outside the mainstream means you're a Southern European immigrant, or at least of that stock. I don't know. I think they may have been immigrants. And if you have really off-the-wall political views. Now, some would say that because they were persecuted, therefore their political views were correct. You didn't pass logic, did you? Go try it again. So, next thing we're going to do, and I'll just set it up briefly, we're going to look at the presidential candidacy of a flamboyant New York governor named Alfred E. Smith. So, that will be part 7.